Do you believe in miracles in Formula One? In Monza, 1967, something happened that seemed impossible. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history, the fastest of his era. His speed was impressive on many occasions, but it was in the most difficult moments that he showed his true talent. And one of the greatest demonstrations of this happened at the 1967 Italian Grand Prix. That season, one driver was leaving his mark on the tracks. The two-time world champion of 1963 and 1965, Jim Clark. However, the year was not easy for the Scotsman, as had happened in previous seasons. Clark suffered from several mechanical problems, often when leading races, losing valuable points as a result. Up to that point, he had won in Zandvoort and Silverstone. But in 6 other races, his performance had been compromised by failures in his Lotus. Meanwhile, Denny Hulme took advantage of opportunities and led the championship with a 9-point advantage over his teammate and boss, Jack Brabham. Clark was in 4th place, 24 points behind Hulme, with only 27 still up for grabs. That year, Lotus had an innovative car, the 49 model, a lower and lighter car thanks to its aluminum monocoque and the famous 3-liter Ford Cosworth V8 DFV engine. Simply the most dominant engine in Formula One history. It was the first year of that engine, and Lotus had exclusive use of it in '67. The car was still unreliable, but extremely dominant in races it managed to finish. During qualifying in Monza, a light rain fell in the middle of the session, but that did not stop Clark from securing pole position. Jim set the fastest lap in 1 minute 28.5 seconds, averaging almost 240 kilometers per hour. He would start ahead of fellow team owners Jack Brabham and Bruce McLaren. Hulme would only secure 6th place, while Clark's Lotus teammate, Graham Hill, would start from 8th. The start was confusing. It was the first race to use starting lights. There were some issues, but all the drivers managed to complete the first lap without incidents on the fast Italian circuit. Dan Gurney, who had started in 5th, made a great getaway and took the lead with his Eagle. A team created by Gurney himself with financial backing from Carroll Shelby and other American investors. Gurney was followed by Brabham, Hill's Lotus, Chris Amon in the Ferrari, and Clark right behind. With Monza still lacking chicanes at that time, slipstreaming allowed for constant position changes, creating a spectacle for the audience. Back then, a lap around Monza was taken almost entirely flat out, with drivers lifting only at Lesmo and Parabolica. Just 2.5 laps after the start, Clark executed a spectacular maneuver, overtaking the 3 drivers ahead of him and taking the lead. He pushed hard to open a gap, essential to prevent his rivals from using the slipstream to attack. But the road to victory would not be simple. Clark felt that his car was not behaving correctly, and soon, the group formed by Hill, Brabham, and Hulme caught up with him. The championship leader, Denny Hulme, even took the lead for a brief moment. On lap 13, Clark entered the pits after identifying the problem: a punctured right rear tire. At a time when pit stops were rare unless in an emergency, this was a major setback. Clark pulled into the pits and lost an entire lap. Any other driver would have accepted their fate and abandoned the race. But Jim Clark was not just any driver. When he returned to the track, Clark was in 15th place, the last of the remaining runners, and 1 lap behind the top 3. Meanwhile, At the front, Hume, Brabham, and Hill continued to battle intensely for the lead. But Clark's recovery had begun. By lap 21, he already caught up with the trio. He wasted no time and quickly overtook all three. Clark began gaining on the leaders, reducing the gap lap by lap. Shortly after, Hume retired due to engine overheating. Clark was the fastest driver on track, closing in on Brabham by 1 to 2 seconds per lap. Hill noticed this and used his teammate's slipstream to gain time, further increasing the gap to the competition. By lap 55, Clark was already in 4th place. Jack Brabham and John Surtees were fiercely battling for 2nd position. Clark was slowly approaching the fight for the podium when, on lap 58, to everyone's astonishment, Jim Clark had already moved up to 2nd in an unbelievable comeback, sending the passionate Italian crowd into a frenzy, even though it wasn't a Ferrari putting on the show. Then, on lap 59, Graham Hill's engine failed at the Parabolica, forcing the Brit to retire and leaving oil on the track. Clark had only a small lead, but seemed in control of the situation. As the cars crossed the pit lane for the final lap, everyone rushed to the pit wall to witness one of the greatest victories in Formula One history. But suddenly, the Lotus engine started to falter at Curva Grande, showing signs of running out of fuel. Surtees and Brabham sped past the Scotsman and began a thrilling duel to the finish line. In the final corner, Parabolica, Brabham dived inside to overtake Surtees. Brabham hit the sand that had been laid after Hill's breakdown, masterfully controlled the car, but Surtees managed to cut back on the exit, the two coming side by side onto the final straight. In a dramatic finish, they crossed the line almost together, with Surtees winning by just 0.2 of a second in one of the closest finishes in Formula One history. For Clark, it was a heartbreaking moment. The team soon discovered that there were still 11 liters of fuel left in the car, but the fuel pump failed to draw the remaining amount from the tank. His Lotus ran out of power just meters from glory. He still secured 3rd place on the podium, but that result was not enough to make up for his incredible recovery drive. The 2-time world champion won the final 2 races of the season and finished 3rd in the championship. The following year, he began the season with a victory, but tragically lost his life in an accident during a Formula 2 race in April 1968, at just 32 years old. After his death, Colin Chapman wrote about his friend.
I think Jimmy's characteristic as a driver was that he was always relaxed, in control of the situation, and very rarely drove beyond 90% of his capacity. He had so much natural ability that he drove within his limits much more than most drivers. There were occasions when he really drove with intensity, and those were the rare moments when he showed his pure genius by driving much faster than any of his contemporaries. I remember the Italian Grand Prix at Monza in 1967. This was just one of the rare races in Jimmy's career where he drove at the limit. I can think of only 4 or 5 other occasions in the entire 10 years he drove for me where he truly used all his resources. Because generally he was capable of making a very quick start, getting out in front of the opposition and demoralizing them. I am sure that over time someone will come along and be hailed as the greatest of all time, but not by me. To me, there will never be another on Jimmy's level.
At the 1967 Italian Grand Prix, Jim Clark was cheered by the passionate Italian crowd chanting his name at the end of the race. Jim didn't win, but that day, in a euphoric Monza, he became immortal in one of the greatest spectacles ever witnessed in Formula One.